I still remember the day we gathered in the abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Our group of friends had been drawn to the occult for years, each with their own reasons and motivations. Some sought power, others curiosity, but all shared a sense of restlessness that couldn't be satiated by the mundane routines of everyday life. We were an eclectic bunch, united in our desire to push beyond the boundaries of what was considered acceptable. The warehouse loomed before us, its peeling walls bearing witness to years of neglect and decay. Our leader, Rachel, stood at the entrance, her eyes gleaming with a fervor that bordered on fanaticism. We exchanged nervous glances, our hearts racing in anticipation of what lay ahead. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and forgotten memories. As we filed inside, the creaking of old wooden beams seemed to echo through the space, as if warning us away from the secrets that slumbered within. Rachel began her ritual, her voice weaving a hypnotic spell that drew us in like moths to a flame. We followed her lead, our movements choreographed by years of practice and shared obsession. The words she spoke were ancient incantations, passed down through generations of occultists who had dared to tread this path before us. As the final words left her lips, a shiver ran down my spine. Something had shifted, like the faint tremors that precede an earthquake. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had crossed a threshold, one from which there was no return. The air seemed to thicken as Rachel's words hung in the air, a palpable weight that pressed upon our skin. We felt it, this presence, like a gentle breeze on a summer day, yet it was anything but gentle. It was a whisper in the darkness, a soft rustling of leaves that spoke of decay and corruption. Our eyes met, and I saw the fire in Rachel's gaze had grown to a raging inferno, her pupils dilating as she invoked the ancient powers. The room seemed to darken, the shadows deepening into abyssal voids that yawned open like mouths screaming in silence. Our leader's voice rose, a crescendo of malevolent intent that shattered the fragile calm. I felt my own heart racing, my breath coming in short gasps as if I'd been running for hours. The words she spoke were not just incantations, but prayers to beings from beyond our world. Beings that would grant us power, but at what cost? The cost of our very souls. Our eyes rolled back, and I felt myself losing my grip on reality. Rachel's hands danced in the air, weaving a web of darkness that seemed to draw everything towards her. We were all entranced, bound by an unseen force that threatened to consume us whole. And then she called out to them, our names echoing through the void like prayers to forgotten gods. "Asterion," she whispered, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. It was as if something had responded, its presence like a cold breeze on a winter's night. Our leader's eyes snapped back into focus, her gaze burning with an unholy light. We knew then that we had crossed the threshold, that there was no going back. The veil between worlds had been desecrated, and nothing would ever be the same again. As we stood before Rachel, our leader's eyes blazed with an otherworldly intensity. She reached out a hand, her fingers closing around my wrist like a vice. "Asterion," she whispered, her breath cold against my skin. I felt a jolt of electricity run through me, as if the very words had awakened something deep within. "You are chosen," she continued, her voice dripping with an unholy fervor. "Chosen to receive the first rites of passage." The others nodded, their faces set with determination, as if they too were ready to surrender themselves to the unknown. Rachel led us deeper into the warehouse, the air growing thick with an eerie presence that seemed to seep from the very walls. We passed through a doorway hidden behind a tattered tapestry and found ourselves in a small, dimly lit chamber. The walls were adorned with ancient symbols, their meanings lost to me but seemingly crucial to our ritual. In the center of the room, a large stone altar loomed, upon which rested a single leather-bound book. Rachel opened the cover, revealing pages filled with strange, arcane script. "The Book of the Damned," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. As she read from the book, the words seemed to come alive, crawling across the page like living things. I felt a creeping sense of dread, as if we were delving into the very depths of madness itself. The others watched with rapt attention, their eyes gleaming with an unsettling fervor. And then, Rachel spoke the final words, her voice dripping with malevolent glee. "Let it begin," she whispered, and I knew that our descent into madness had begun. The air seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly energy as Rachel's words hung in the air. I felt a presence stirring, like the gentle lapping of waves on a shore that grew more turbulent by the second. The symbols on the walls began to glow with a faint, eerie light, casting an unnatural illumination over the chamber. The others seemed entranced, their eyes fixed upon Rachel as if she were a conduit for some ancient power. I felt a growing sense of unease, as if we had unleashed a force that was beyond our control. And then, it happened. A low, pulsing hum filled the air, like the reverberation of 1,000 distant drums. The walls seemed to shudder, the symbols on them blurring and shifting like living things. I felt my vision begin to blur, as if reality itself was unraveling before my eyes. Rachel's face twisted in a grotesque grin, her eyes blazing with an unholy light. "It is awake," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the cacophony of sound that had erupted around us. The hum grew louder, more intense, until it seemed to be pounding in my very chest. I felt myself being drawn towards Rachel as if some unseen force was compelling me closer. And then I saw it. A presence coalesced before us, its form shifting and flowing like a liquid. It was indescribable, impossible to comprehend. Yet somehow I knew what it was. It was the void, that abyssal darkness that lurked at the heart of all existence. It was the absence of being, the negation of all that was real, and it was hungry. As the void entity coalesced before us, Rachel's eyes gleamed with an unholy light. She reached out a hand, her fingers extended in a gesture that seemed to be both ancient and eternal. "The rite of binding," she whispered, her voice dripping with malevolent intent. "We must bind it, hold it back from the world." The others nodded, their faces set with determination, as if they too were ready to surrender themselves to the unknown. I felt a sense of trepidation, as if we had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. Rachel's hand closed around an object that seemed to be hidden in her palm, a small, ornate box adorned with symbols of binding and restraint. She opened it, revealing a length of black cord, its surface etched with tiny runes that seemed to pulse with a dark energy. "This is the cord of shadows," she whispered. "With this, we can bind the void entity." The others watched as Rachel tied the cord around her wrist, the black material seeming to absorb the light around it like a void. She then reached out and touched my forehead, her fingers tracing intricate patterns that seemed to sear themselves into my mind. I felt a jolt of electricity run through me, as if my very soul was being ripped from its moorings. And then she bound the cord around mine, the sensation like nothing I had ever experienced before. The void entity seemed to thrash and writhe, like a living thing trying to break free from its bonds. But Rachel's grip was unyielding, her eyes blazing with an unholy light. "We are bound," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. "Together, we will hold back the void." As I looked around at the others, I saw that they too were bound, their faces twisted in a mixture of fear and determination. We were a group of sorcerers, united in our quest to bind the void entity and keep it from the world. But as I looked into Rachel's eyes, I wondered if we had made a terrible mistake. As the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The others seemed to be changing, their behavior growing more erratic and paranoid. Rachel's grip on reality seemed to be slipping, her eyes taking on a manic gleam that made me wonder if she was still in control. And then there were the dreams. Dark, twisted visions of the void entity looming over us, its presence suffocating and oppressive. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. The void entity was real and it was coming for us. One night, as we gathered around the fire in our makeshift camp, Rachel's eyes seemed to flash with a malevolent intensity. "It's time," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling of the flames. "We must perform the final ritual." The others nodded, their faces set with determination, but I could sense the fear lurking beneath the surface. We gathered around her, our hands clasped together in a circle of binding and restraint. Rachel began to chant, her voice rising and falling in a hypnotic rhythm that seemed to draw us deeper into the void. And then, it happened. The air seemed to ripple and distort, like the surface of a pond struck by a stone. A cold wind blew through the camp, extinguishing the flames and plunging us into darkness. I felt a presence looming over us, its weight crushing and oppressive. And then everything went black. I came to in a darkness so profound it was almost palpable. My head throbbed with a dull ache, as if I'd been hit by a sledgehammer. Slowly, I became aware of my surroundings. We were in some sort of chamber, the walls made of cold, gray stone that seemed to absorb all light. The air was heavy with the scent of decay and rot. I tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness washed over me, forcing me back onto the ground. As I waited for the world to stop spinning, I became aware of a presence beside me. It was Rachel, her eyes black as coal, her skin deathly pale. "Welcome back," she whispered, her voice like a rusty gate. "We've been waiting for you." I tried to speak, but my voice was hoarse and barely audible. "What's going on?" I croaked. Rachel smiled, revealing pointed teeth. "The void entity has claimed us," she said, her voice dripping with malevolence. "It's inside us now." As she spoke, I felt a creeping sense of dread. My skin prickled with goosebumps as I realized that she was right. The entity was inside me, its presence coursing through my veins like liquid darkness. Panic set in as I scrambled to my feet, but my legs felt like jelly. Rachel reached out and grasped my arm, her grip like a vice. "Don't try to run," she warned, her eyes glinting with a sinister light. "You're mine now." And then everything went black once more. I found myself standing in front of a row of mirrors, each one reflecting a different version of myself. I was the person I used to be, the person I thought I was, and the person I had become after being consumed by the void entity. The mirrors seemed to ripple and distort, like the surface of a pond struck by a stone. I approached one of them cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. As I looked into its depths, I saw a reflection that made my blood run cold. It was a person with no eyes, their face twisted into a scream of agony. The mirror seemed to be pulling me in, drawing me closer and closer until I felt like I was being swallowed whole. Suddenly, the mirrors erupted into a cacophony of reflections, each one flashing and flickering like a strobe light. I stumbled backwards, tripping over my own feet as the world around me dissolved into chaos. When the lights came back on, I found myself in a room filled with more mirrors, each one reflecting a different version of reality. I saw worlds that were familiar yet strange, landscapes that defied explanation, and creatures that seemed to be made of shadow and smoke. The mirrors seemed to stretch on forever, a never-ending labyrinth of reflections and illusions. And then I saw myself standing at the center of it all, my eyes black as coal, my skin deathly pale. I was no longer human, but a vessel for the void entity's malevolent spirit. The mirrors seemed to be reflecting back at me a version of myself that was both familiar and yet completely alien. I knew then that I had been consumed by the void, that there was no escape from its madness-inducing grasp. As I stood at the center of the mirror labyrinth, I felt my grip on reality begin to slip. The reflections around me began to warp and distort, like a funhouse mirror reflecting distorted images of myself. I tried to reach out and touch one of them, but my hand passed through as if it were made of smoke. The mirrors seemed to be pulling me in, drawing me closer and closer until I felt like I was being stretched to the breaking point. My mind reeled with visions of infinite corridors, each one leading to more reflections, more mirrors, and more versions of myself. I saw myself as a child, playing in a field of wildflowers that seemed to stretch on forever. I saw myself as an old man, sitting on a beach watching the sunset. And I saw myself as a creature, its body made of twisted metal and wires, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly energy. The mirrors were unraveling reality itself, revealing hidden threads and unseen patterns that underlay the fabric of existence. I felt like I was being pulled apart at the seams, my consciousness fragmenting into 1,000 different pieces. And yet, even as I felt myself disintegrating, I knew that I was still holding on to something. Something that made me who I was, something that gave my life meaning and purpose. It was a spark of light, a small flame of sanity that burned brightly in the darkness. I clung to it, desperate to keep it alive as the mirrors continued to warp and distort around me. The world around me had descended into chaos. The mirrors had shattered, sending shards of glass flying in all directions. I stumbled through the wreckage, my mind reeling from the sheer force of the destruction. And yet, even as I felt like I was losing my grip on reality, I knew that something else was happening. The echoes of insanity were rising to the surface, whispers of madness that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. "You're not real," one voice whispered in my ear. "You're just a simulation." Another voice laughed maniacally, its tone dripping with sadistic glee. I spun around, trying to locate the source of each sound, but there was no one there. The echoes seemed to be coming from within myself, a chorus of conflicting voices that were driving me mad. My thoughts were a jumble of fear and confusion, my mind racing with questions and doubts. What was real? What wasn't? Was I still human, or had the void entity consumed me entirely? I stumbled through the wreckage, searching for answers that seemed to be just out of reach. And then I saw it. A figure standing in front of me, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly energy. It was myself, but not myself. It was a reflection of my own sanity, shattered and broken beyond repair. "You're done," the echo said, its voice like a rusty gate. "You've been broken." I tried to speak, but my voice was gone, lost in the void. The echo laughed again, its laughter echoing through my mind like a mantra of madness. And then everything went black. The darkness closed in around me like a shroud, suffocating me with its weight. I was trapped in an endless void, with no escape from the abyss that yawned before me. The air was thick with the stench of decay and death, and I could feel the weight of countless bodies pressing down upon me. It was as if I had been swallowed whole by some giant cosmic mouth. I tried to scream, but my voice was drowned out by the cacophony of whispers that echoed through the void. "Welcome to the abattoir," a voice whispered in my ear, "where the damned are slaughtered and devoured." The words sent a shiver down my spine as I realized that I was not alone in this place. There were others here, other souls who had been dragged screaming into the abyss. They were being processed, their essence torn from their bodies like meat from a carcass. I watched in horror as they were consumed by some unseen force, their screams echoing through the void like the wail of the damned. And then I saw it. The void itself was alive, a living, breathing entity that pulsed with an otherworldly energy. It was the source of all life and death, the wellspring from which all existence flowed. I felt its power coursing through my veins, drawing me in with an inexorable force. I was being pulled into the heart of the void, where I would be consumed by its abyssal hunger. The thought sent a thrill of fear through me, but it was also exhilarating. For the first time in my life, I felt truly alive. The void's power coursed through me like a river of fire, burning away all my doubts and fears. I felt myself being pulled apart and put back together again, my very essence being reshaped by the void's malevolent will. My consciousness expanded, reaching out to encompass the infinite expanse of the cosmos. I saw the birth and death of stars, the dance of galaxies, and the eternal cycle of creation and destruction. And in that moment, I knew that I was not separate from the void. I was a part of it, a thread in its vast tapestry of existence. The void's hunger for me had been satiated, but now it would consume everything else. I felt my mind fragmenting, my thoughts dissolving into a sea of madness. The world around me melted away, leaving only the void's abyssal presence. And yet, even as I was being consumed by its power, I knew that I was not alone. There were others out there, souls who had been drawn to the void like moths to a flame. They would soon be mine, their essence merging with my own in a cosmic dance of destruction and rebirth. The thought sent a shiver down my spine, but it was also a thrill of excitement. For I knew that I was now a part of something greater than myself, a force that would reshape the universe in its image. The void's power coursed through me like a river of fire, burning away all my doubts and fears. And in that moment, I knew that I was consumed by its infinite, abyssal hunger.